In a traditional story, there is our main character, maybe a secondary main character, and then there are what I call writing tools. Meaning, the rest of the characters that may be in a show, as well written and dynamic as those characters may be, all serve as writing tools for the writers to develop our main characters further. Or, in other words, they are there to serve a functional purpose in the progression of our main character's story arc. Now, I'm not saying that these secondary characters are just write offs, they oftentimes can have many character arcs of their own. In fact, in great writing, these writing tools should be characters that are able to stand on their own, and in great writing, it shouldn't be obvious to the audience that they are serving as a writing tool. They should blend in. Now, when watching Breaking Bad, I realized the writers of this show understood how to use characters in this way. There are many instances of this throughout the show, but I thought one of the strongest, one of the most clear, and one of the most powerful examples of this occurring in the show is with the character Jane. Breaking Bad is a show that revolves around the character Walter White. During the first season, we really only enlarged focus around Walter White's perspective. However, as the season went on and we got into season 2, Jesse Pinkman started to get more of his own camera time, away from Walter White entirely. At first, I wasn't sure if Jesse was going to be a side character, one of these writing tools for our main character Walter, but by the end of season 2, I feel confident in saying that he is definitely a secondary main character. Arguably, he is still serving as a tool for Walter White's story arc, but there is a lot of nuance there, and a great discussion to be had. Walter and Pinkman play off of each other more than just serving as tools. So, establishing that Jesse Pinkman is a main character, that means he is capable of having a secondary character serve as a writing tool for him. In this instance, we will be focusing on the character Jane in relation to Jesse's story arc. Now, this video only contains spoilers for the first 2 seasons. Even though further episodes would help strengthen my point, I feel confident enough that Jesse's arc can be seen throughout season 2 with Jane that I don't need to spoil further seasons. Having been intensely studying writing for a little while, the second I saw Jane, especially with the way her character is designed cosmetically, I immediately knew she would have a relationship with Jesse. And I also knew, due to the nature of the show she is in, her relationship with Jesse would probably be brief. The only previous reference point of a relationship we have for Jesse would be with the blonde girl he hooks up with. However, he doesn't seem to share much emotional investment with that woman. It seems to be a purely sexual exchange. However, when we see him interact with Jane for the first time, we can actually see him feeling a little nervous. He stumbles over his words, and he even feels slightly awkward, doing silly things like accidentally getting scared of the garbage disposal and making a comment about being a fan of the hardwood.
I'm a fan of the hardwood.
He even makes a point to note that he had his own house.
Had an entire house before.
And we notice that he is more attentive to his actions compared to how he normally is. Overall, we quickly get the vibe that he is flirting, or at the very least, feels slightly nervous around this girl. And it is in this scene that we also get a sneak peek of the new perspective that Jane will allow us to have on our already established character Jesse. Jesse, due to his environment and the people he is around, rarely allows himself to be vulnerable. Even before the incidents with Walter involving murder and the cleaning up of the body, Jesse was already pretty closed off. With all the added criminal background, it caused Jesse to be even more deeply paranoid of being arrested. So in this scene, when we actually get a moment of him being sincere, it means that much more. And we can see that in the last little moment of the scene when Jesse accidentally gives his real name.
It's Jesse. Jesse Jackson.
And the acting here really says it all. Jesse is not thinking about his criminal life while he's talking to her in this moment. He's being sincere. As a viewer, I was excited to see more of this side of Jesse. And from a writer's POV, this is one of the main ways that I felt you could expose this side of Jesse's character naturally. And it is only because of the introduction of Jane that we're really going to be able to see this side of him. In the next major scene that we get between Jane and Jesse, they have a brief conversation while Jane is drawing on the porch. We discover that Jane is an artist that designs tattoos, giving us a little bit more depth to her character. Jesse shares that he also used to draw, and Jane asked why Jesse stopped drawing. Here, we see Jesse hold back from being vulnerable.
You used to be a drawer too, huh? What stopped you?
Just... So, tell me something.
He instead changes the topic back to Jane. And lastly, at the end of the scene, a motorcycle man pulls up, making a remark about Jesse, and while doing so, accidentally revealing that his last name is in fact Pinkman and not Jackson, like he told Jane. Jesse then awkwardly walks off, knowing that he messed up. It was at this point that Jesse could have gone one of two ways. In the past, he would either lie, ignore it completely, or run away from the problem entirely. However, in the next scene that we get between these two characters, Jesse goes out of his way to tell the truth. Talk about being vulnerable. If you're human, you probably know that it's not easy to admit when you're wrong, or lying for that matter. And Jesse, being human, struggles with this too, and probably more so than the average person because of all of his trust issues that he has. This sincere and quiet moment that we get between Jane and Jesse, in which Jesse tells Jane not just the truth about his name, but also the truth about Walter not being his dad, allows the viewers to know that Jesse is capable of being this kind of person. And once again, it's a nice breather from how his character normally acts.
Hey, Poochie. How you doing? It's Jesse Pinkman. And that guy you met, he's not my dad.
Arguably, you could say that this is the real Jesse, and that the other Jesse that deals drugs and is involved in more scandalous things is just him putting on a facade and coping with his anxieties in a pretty harmful way. And then at the end of the scene, he invites Jane inside to see his new flat-screen TV. He's very awkwardly trying to make conversation, and Jane is just sitting there not saying anything while the TV tries to connect to the satellite. The scene ends with Jane slowly grabbing Jesse's hand. This was an important moment for Jesse's development. It reinforced to him, probably for the first time in a while, that being honest is a rewarding thing. Often, because of the life he lives, he can rarely ever be honest. And if he is honest, it could come with great consequences. Like he could potentially go to jail or even get killed. So I was excited to see how he would progress after getting this strong positive reinforcement towards being honest and vulnerable. A main point of contention between Walt and Jesse...
Man, I gotta try this. No. No, we only sell it. We don't use it.
is the fact that Jesse uses drugs.
Okay, since when?
This is an important aspect of Jesse's character. We learn that it was one of the original reasons that he was kicked out of his parents' home. So, in the next scene, when we learn that Jane is in fact 18 months sober, I was very excited for the path that I thought Jesse might go down. Keep in mind at this point, I was unaware there were 5 seasons. I like to go into things blind. And I somehow temporarily forgot that I was watching a Breaking Bad episode. We're not allowed to have nice things. Anyways, Jesse's reaction to learning that Jane is 18 months sober is kind of telling and endearing.
You know, I don't really burn much anymore. It's just a sometime thing, but no more like in the house.
His response is that he only lights up occasionally now, which is not entirely the truth. It came across to me that this might cause him to start cutting back on his drug usage. He seems to like this girl and doesn't want to mess it up. Having introduced this new element to Jane and Jesse's relationship, I knew it would be an important subject to keep an eye on as their relationship continues to develop. And in all honesty, this is when I realized that this was going to probably be the majority of Jane's purpose. In summary, so far, Jane's purpose as a writing tool has been to explore Jesse's vulnerable side and his relationship with drugs. In the next scene, we see that Jesse gets frustrated with Walt because Walt calls him in to cook. He was planning to spend the day with Jane at a museum, something very unlike him to do. As a viewer, we want this for him, or at least I did. This seems like a positive influence on his life, and we realize that there is a potential for Jesse to start himself down a new path. But Walter convinces him to go cook by lying about their chemical expiring soon. We get a cute scene of Jesse trying to make Jane a surprise breakfast, and then a scene after that where Jane is looking through Jesse's old art with him, once again showing us a side of his character we aren't used to seeing. However, looking at those two moments in hindsight, these scenes are mainly serving as a way to make what happens at the end hurt even more, both for the audience and for Jesse. They are deepening Jesse's bond with Jane, like applying additional hot wax, just so when it's ripped off later, the audience and Jesse definitely will feel it. Now I'm going to skip a few scenes here, but to summarize what happens in them for the sake of making sure we have context, Jane's dad comes into the picture. Jane lies to her dad that she doesn't know Jesse, and this causes an argument between Jesse and Jane. We can see how quickly Jesse reverts back to needing to rely on drugs to cope with stress when this happens. She apologizes by sliding one of her drawings under Jesse's door. We also gain an awareness that Jane's dad attends her AA meetings with her, and we also see that her father is slightly suspicious that Jane is having relations with Jesse. The last piece of information we need here to continue further analyzing is the fact that one of Jesse's dealers gets shot and killed, causing Jesse to have a great amount of stress, and once again, needing to rely on drugs to help him cope. In the next scene, we get a truly pivotal moment for Jesse and Jane. Up to this point, Jane has only been a source of positive reinforcement for Jesse, especially in regards to his drug usage. But after admitting to Jane that he is a drug dealer and that one of his men died, he asks her to leave because he wants to smoke.
I need you to leave.
She tries to advise him that it won't help, but he doesn't listen, and once again he asks her to leave.
It won't help.
And then, just as Jane is about to leave, she turns around and goes to join Jesse in getting high. This is a pivotal moment for both characters. My heart sank in this moment. I was devastated for Jane. Even though she's only a small character in the grand scheme of our story, I was sad that she gave in. I was enjoying her character and all of the positive aspects of Jesse's character that she was bringing out, and part of me was angry at Jesse for it too. After this moment, Jane really slips deep and slips fast into her old drug habits. She introduces Jesse to heroin, and we watch her make it. Seeing her make it displays to the audience a bit of her history and knowledge, and also while she is making it, we don't see any hesitation in her body language or facial expressions. She has relapsed, and relapsed hard. After waking up late for 2 of her meetings with her dad, we get this scene in which Jane's dad barges into Jesse's apartment while they're still sleeping. He quickly realizes that Jane has been using again, and wow, what a scene this is. Even though this may seem like an important moment for Jane, which it is an even more important moment for Jesse. And I'm going to try to argue that this scene was purposely written with the intention of giving Jesse perspective and growth more than focusing on Jane's storyline. The main reason that we know this is because of the framing of the shot and the dialogue choices. The framing of the shot shows Jesse in the background with Jane on our left and her father on our right, and with the important note of Jesse being located in the middle. Additionally, even though Jane and her dad are the ones speaking, our camera focuses and stays focused on Jesse when they are holding this frame. Meanwhile, Jane and her father are blurry. Jesse's face and his digestion of what is happening is what the writer feels is the most important element for the audience to take away here. He's in the center, he's the thing we should be looking at, and he's focused in on. They could have had this confrontation between the father and Jane without Jesse present. It still would have progressed Jane's story arc. But it's purposeful that he sees it. He sees how his actions, and more specifically his drug use, are affecting other people around him. And then there is the dialogue of Jane's father, reminding us that it's been 18 months.
18 months? You have been clean for 18 months, Jane. Why? Why do you do it?
The audience and Jesse get that reminder that if it weren't for Jesse, she would still be 18 months clean. And then one of the most powerful lines is delivered by Jane when she says,
What, you think I'm proud of this? Like I do it on purpose?
Hearing Jane openly admit that she is self-aware of how bad this is to do is something Jesse hasn't experienced before, especially with someone he's cared about. The people he surrounds himself with don't think doing drugs is bad, and even if they do, they would never say it in such an insightful way. Now, if you happen to still be watching, I'd really love to know your opinion and thoughts on what she's actually feeling here. At first, I thought it was sincere of Jane to say, and I think I still lean towards sincerity. However, after her father leaves, she puts on a different front to Jesse when Jesse asks if she meant what she said.
You meant all that?
I don't know. I just think if we had enough money, nobody could make us do anything.
And we can see that Jesse was affected by what she said because of this question. Jane promises to go into rehab tomorrow, and the scene ends.
What, you think I'm proud of this? Like I do it on purpose?
You meant all that?
I don't know.
Now, while I'm watching TV shows, sometimes I like to write notes down. And while I was watching this episode 12, At minute 37, I wrote down, Jane is serving as a clear writing tool for Jesse. I predict she will either be dead soon, or Jesse will leave her when he completes this part of his arc. And the reason I felt confident when making this prediction is because I felt like everything Jane was put into the story to do had been checked off of her little checklist. And the only way to check off the last objective remaining on her list, which is the objective of causing Jesse great emotional pain so he undergoes some kind of transformation, has yet to occur. And the only way I saw that happening would either be through a breakup or death. And then, at minute 45, our beloved Jane dies. Focusing on her death scene with Walt itself, I think definitely deserves its own video. The actor that plays Walter White, Bryan Cranston, did a phenomenal job telling us every single line of conflicting thought that he had, and he did it only with his eyes. What a truly great and gut-wrenching performance. Her last task she completes as a writing tool is the most impactful one that she has on our character Jesse. Her death is the catalyst for Jesse's transformation going into season 3. One of the worst parts for me as a viewer was knowing that Jesse was going to wake up to one of, if not the worst day of his life. So, Jesse wakes up to find Jane dead and tries to perform CPR. After realizing that it won't work, he backs away and begins crying at the realization. And just as a quick note, look at Aaron's acting here. You can see in this moment that this isn't just some minor hurdle Jesse will be able to push through. Then he goes to call Walter, and Walter already knows what will be going on the other end. Truly heartbreaking. In a later scene, Walter tracks down Jesse and finds him in a crack house. Jesse is extremely high when Walter gets to him, but after a few seconds, Walter gets through to him, and Jesse has this moment where he completely falls apart, gripping onto Walter as he uncontrollably cries, confessing his love for Jane, and then the most telling part, how he believes he is responsible for her death, crying, "I killed her."
I killed her. I killed her. It was me. I got her back.
And his person was changed forever. When Jane was first introduced, she had the potential to develop Jesse's character into several different avenues. Jane's character had her own unique personality, her own mini character arc, and was overall well developed. Hopefully, that got you thinking on a new way to look at side characters and story writing. Maybe next time a new character is introduced, you think about what kind of traits they have and how they might play off of the main character and the current place they are in their character arc. It's safe to say Jane's purpose from a writing perspective existed for Jesse. It enabled the audience to see a sensitive and vulnerable side to Jesse. It allowed Jesse to feel those emotions of being open and vulnerable for the first time in a while too. I almost feel like what he went through was worse than never having loved. He got a taste of what a peaceful life could have been like for him. One where he was able to be himself without having to put up barriers to protect himself all the time. What's that saying go like? Is it better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all?